The dog who stopped an execution, the final bark that changed everything. At exactly 9:58 a.m., the chamber was silent. Lucas Gray lay strapped to the gurney, a man the world had forgotten, sentenced to die for a murder he swore he didn't commit. The needle hovered inches from his skin. No appeals left. No family waiting. Only one image burned into his memory. A German shepherd's amber eyes filled with a loyalty that never faded. Then the phone rang. What happened in the next 3 minutes would unravel one of the most horrifying betrayals the justice system had ever seen. And it all began years earlier, when Lucas saved a trembling dog named Cale from a death sentence of his own. This isn't just a story about innocence or guilt. It's about memory, instinct, and how a dog who never forgot his human ended up doing the one thing no lawyer, no jury, no court could, saving his life. The lights never stopped humming in Westfield State Penitentiary. Cold industrial fluorescence beat down on the pale linoleum like judgment from above, clinical, dispassionate, eternal. And beneath that artificial glare, Lucas Hayes lay strapped to the gurney, his wrists raw beneath the leather restraints, his legs immobilized, his chest rising and falling like a man already halfway to the grave. A digital clock on the sterile white wall blinked red, 9:58 a.m. 2 minutes until death. The prison doctor stood to Lucas's left, expression unreadable beneath a pair of smudged glasses. His gloved hand held the syringe, steady, clear liquid catching the light, trembling ever so slightly. This was no prototype, no military experiment. It was protocol. A 3-drug cocktail. Sodium thiopental to induce sleep, pancuronium bromide to paralyze, potassium chloride to stop the heart. It had been administered a dozen times before in this very room. No last-minute mercy, no cinematic rescue, just silence. The warden hovered nearby, arms folded, face carved from stone. Behind the glass partition, the witnesses had begun to lean forward. Some journalists, some state officials, and undoubtedly someone from the Arkell family. Maybe Trevor himself. Lucas didn't bother looking. His eyes were closed, though not in peace. He wasn't praying. He was remembering. Not the courtroom, not the betrayal, not even Warren Arkell's final scream before it was all pinned on him. He was remembering Kyle. That impossibly alert stare, the flecks of amber in his coat, the soft whine he let out when Lucas left for work, and the way he leapt uninvited but always welcome on to the bed at night. The weight of him, the trust of him, a bond without language, stronger than blood. Kyle had been the last good thing in Lucas's life, his redemption, his only real family. I just wish Kyle knew I was innocent, Lucas whispered, his voice cracked from disuse. The microphone, clipped to his gown, picked it up and sent the words echoing through the chamber. No final speech, no long-winded statement. Just that. A wish. A truth flung into the void. The warden tilted his head toward the doctor. The man in white nodded and began moving toward the IV line. Gloved fingers hovered near the injection port, hesitating only for a second. He was trained not to see people-only protocol. Lucas felt his breath steady. This was it. His death wouldn't be a scream, wouldn't be a plea. Just a final moment, one more thing taken from him. In his mind, he walked again beside the river trail, the sun slanting golden over the trees, the wind carrying the sharp scent of pine. Kyle bounded ahead off-leash, glancing back every few steps, making sure Lucas was still there. That silent check-in, that wordless loyalty. It had carried Lucas through 5 years of concrete and steel. And now, There was nothing left to carry him at all. The doctor's hand inched closer. 1 minute. Outside the chamber, no one spoke. The air had gone dense, as though the room itself was holding its breath. Even the buzzing lights seemed to dim, as if the world were giving up with him. But then, ring! A sound split the air like lightning across a black sky. The phone. The prison phone. On the wall near the observation glass, the emergency line blared, insistent and sharp. The sound did not belong in this room. Not at this hour. Not in this ritual. The doctor froze mid-motion. Syringe still loaded, hovering. Warden Stone spun toward the phone, every line in his posture alert. No one moved, not the guards, not the witnesses. The silence was deafening. He picked up. "Warden Stone," he said, voice clipped. A pause. Then, "Repeat that." Another pause. This one longer. The warden turned, locking eyes with the doctor. "Stop the execution." His voice boomed into the room like a verdict reversed. For a moment, no one knew what to do. The doctor stepped back, lowering the syringe, eyes wide now with something like relief or fear. A second guard moved toward Lucas, fumbling with the straps at his wrists. Lucas lay still, unmoving. He'd heard the words. He'd heard stop, not delay, not pause, stop. And yet, he couldn't breathe. His body refused to believe it. His chest rose in shallow bursts as his mind struggled to catch up. "What's going on?" he asked, voice hoarse. No one answered him directly. The warden was still at the phone, nodding stiffly, lips pressed into a thin line. "Understood. I'll inform the staff. We're initiating the protocol suspension now." He hung up. Lucas blinked at the ceiling, eyes adjusting to the glare of the lights again. The world hadn't changed. The air still stank of bleach and fear. But something was different. He was alive. Still alive. As the guard begins unstrapping Lucas, he closes his eyes, not in exhaustion but in a tidal wave of disbelief. The hum of the room fades, and in the silence, memory takes hold. Cale, not just a dog, but the only soul who never doubted him, comes into focus, and we cut like a fade through time into the memory that gave him strength for 5 lost years. The cell faded. Not the one with flickering lights and the gurney. The other kind, the one built inside a man's chest when the world abandons him. And in that darkness, memory took shape. 5 years earlier. A cold February afternoon. The county shelter sat at the edge of the industrial district, tucked between a rusted recycling plant and an abandoned lot. The air outside had smelled like metal and wet cement. Inside, it smelled like bleach, fear, and loneliness. Lucas hadn't planned to adopt a dog that day. He hadn't planned anything. He just couldn't sit in that sterile apartment anymore, staring at bank statements, wondering why the company's numbers didn't make sense, wondering why his chest hurt every time he opened his email and saw Warren's name, but not his trust. He needed air. He needed out. The barking hit him first. That kind of desperate, echoing chaos only kennels could hold. But as the volunteer led him past row after row of wagging tails, lunging bodies, pleading eyes, something strange happened. He didn't stop at the puppies. He didn't look at the ones pressing themselves against the chain-link fences, begging for a chance. He stopped at the dog that didn't move. Run down Kennel 47. The card read, KAL, German Shepherd, approx. 4 years, picked up off Route 16. Aggressive. Not recommended for homes with children. Scheduled for euthanasia. Friday. Caleb sat curled at the back of the cage, silent. His fur was matted along the hips, ribs pressing through the skin. But it wasn't the neglect that caught Lucas's breath. It was the eyes. They weren't wild or panicked. They were tired, watching, measuring, not broken, but betrayed. "Has anyone walked him?" Lucas asked quietly. The volunteer shook her head. "He doesn't let anyone touch him. He bit a handler last week." Lucas crouched, ignoring the sting in his knees from the concrete. The shepherd didn't move, but his ears twitched slightly at the sound of the man's voice. "I know that look," Lucas whispered. "I wore it for about 4 years in foster care." The dog didn't blink. Lucas held his hand out, fingers low and soft. He didn't reach through the bars. He didn't coax. He just waited. And then, slowly, like a question being asked rather than answered, Kyle crept forward. One paw, then another. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just placed his nose gently near the cold metal. "I'm not here to fix you," Lucas said. "I'm just here to sit beside you." And in that quiet, the first bond was sealed. They sent Lucas home that afternoon with a waiver and a warning. "We'll note it's a foster placement, just in case." The shelter director had looked at him like he was either the kindest man alive or a fool heading straight for heartbreak. The drive home was silent. Kyle didn't move from the back seat, just watched the streets pass, alert but unreadable. Lucas's apartment was a top-floor walk-up, barely big enough for one person, let alone one person, and a 70-pound dog with a trauma history. He left the door open. Kyle walked in on his own. Didn't sniff, didn't explore, just stood in the middle of the living room like he was waiting to be sent back. Lucas didn't say much. He just tossed his keys on the table, kicked off his shoes, and lay down on the couch, exhausted from a day he hadn't meant to have. At some point, as the city darkened and the heater hummed against the windows, Kyle moved. No sound, no cue. Lucas woke to a weight on his chest. Not heavy, just present. Kyle had climbed onto the couch, one paw tucked against Lucas's side, his head resting gently above his heart. His eyes were closed. His breathing matched Lucas's like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Lucas didn't move. He didn't dare. Tears slid sideways into the cushion. Not because of joy, but because for the first time in months, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like understanding. And now, 5 years later on, a gurney beneath white lights, with leather around his wrists and death minutes away, that's what Lucas remembered. Not the courtroom, not the screams, not the moment they strapped him down. He remembered Kyle's weight on his chest, and how it made everything feel like it might be okay. 9:59:58. The second hand ticked forward. 10 o'clock a.m. It was supposed to be over. Inside the execution chamber, the silence had a kind of weight thick and absolute. Lucas Hayes lay still on the gurney, not by choice, but because there was nowhere else to go. The straps across his chest, his wrists, his ankles, each one tight enough to remind him he was not a man anymore, just a process. The prison doctor stood to his left, needle hovering over the injection port like a guillotine waiting for gravity's permission. He checked the line. One glance to the warden. Warden Silas Stone didn't blink, didn't nod, just watched. Lucas felt nothing. Not peace, not panic. Just the surreal stillness of a man who had already accepted there would be no more pages after this one. He had closed his eyes, had let Khalil's memory fur brushing against his chest, the steady rhythm of canine breath, be the last thing he ever saw. And then, ring! The shrill analog scream of the wall-mounted phone shattered the stillness like glass. One note, then another, then another. The sound was so violently out of place it made several people behind the witness glass flinch. The prison doctor froze. Lucas's eyes snapped open. For a second, no one moved. Then the warden turned. Slow, deliberate, the kind of movement that made a room hold its breath. 3 long strides, and Stone stood by the phone, one hand on the receiver, the other on the cord, like he needed to feel something tethered. He picked up. "This is Warden Stone." A pause. Tight silence stretched the seconds thin. His jaw clenched. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in comprehension. "Repeat that." Behind the glass, journalists leaned forward. A woman in a dark blazer put a hand to her chest. One of the witnesses whispered something, but no one acknowledged it. The prison doctor didn't lower the syringe. He just waited. Stone spoke again, this time louder, clearer. "Cease all execution procedures immediately." He turned, looked straight at the doctor. "Step back." The man obeyed without a word, placing the syringe on a tray as if it had just become evidence in a crime scene. Lucas didn't speak, couldn't. His throat tightened. The straps still held him down, but something deeper had been loosened. The idea that this moment, this end, was final. It wasn't. The room became movement, guards stepping in, medical staff exchanging glances. A buzz of voices through radios, hushed and hurried. But no one spoke to Lucas. No one told him what the call meant. He strained to lift his head. "What happened?" he croaked. Warden Stone stepped forward slowly, phone still in hand. "There's been a stay," he said. Lucas blinked. "A stay?" The words felt foreign, like something spoken to another man in another timeline. New evidence was submitted, effective immediately. "You're being returned to your cell." The way Stone said it, flat, unshaken, was almost cruel. But there was something behind his voice, something that hadn't been there before. Doubt. Lucas closed his eyes again, but this time not to remember. This time just to breathe. It wasn't over. He wasn't dead. Not yet. As the guards began releasing the restraints, the phone on the wall still hummed faintly from where it had been returned to its cradle. And through the reinforced glass window on the other side of the curtain, beyond the chamber's clinical purgatory, dawn had finally broken. The light was soft, pale, almost apologetic. Lucas didn't know if it was delay or deliverance, but for the first time in 5 years, he had something dangerously close to a feeling he'd buried long ago. Hope. Before the cell. Before the trial. Before the world turned him into a headline, Lucas Hayes was just a young man in a Navy off-the-rack suit, standing in front of a mirrored elevator at Arkell Systems, rehearsing how to say good morning without sounding like he didn't belong. He was 25. No family name, no private school diploma, no one waiting for him at home but a microwave dinner and the sound of traffic. And yet, by some miracle grit, timing, or both, he had landed a spot as a junior assistant at one of the most secretive, well-funded defense contractors in the country. Arkell Systems. The name came with weight, with prestige, with whispers. The company didn't just build smart weapons or unmanned aerial vehicles. It built legacies and ruined them just as fast. And Lucas? Lucas had every intention of surviving it. He had aged out of the foster system at 18 with nothing but a birth certificate, a GED, and a backpack full of broken trust. While others floundered, he kept his head down. Nights working janitorial shifts, days in community college libraries. When others were out partying, he was studying logistics and defense procurement as if he were decoding another language because he was. He earned a scholarship to Middleton University and graduated without missing a class, not because he was brilliant, because no one was coming to save him. His interview at Arkell was a blur, a maze of polished glass and steel with security checkpoints more intense than an airport. But he remembered the moment Warren Arkell walked into the room. Gray suit, no tie, thin-framed glasses. The kind of presence that didn't announce itself. It just settled, like a fog, controlled, measured. "Mr. Hayes," Warren had said, not even glancing at the resume in front of him. "I don't hire people with perfect records. I hire people with scars who know how to hide them." Lucas had stared, unsure how to respond. Then Warren smiled faintly. "You're going to fit in just fine." At first it was menial calendar syncing, coffee runs, redacting reports for military clients. But Lucas didn't complain. He listened. He absorbed. He made himself invisible and invaluable, learning how to anticipate Warren's needs before they were spoken. He worked long hours, made no waves. While other assistants cracked under pressure or chased office gossip, Lucas kept moving, observing. Within 6 months, Warren had promoted him personal assistant, a title that meant nothing on paper, but everything in the building. Only a handful of people were allowed into Warren Arkell's office without knocking. Lucas became one of them. He had access to schedules, to clients, to secure briefings and after-hours meetings that weren't logged in the system. He never asked questions, but he noticed things. Warren didn't trust easily. He didn't trust his own board, his own son, his own lawyers. But he trusted Lucas. And maybe that's why, when Lucas started spotting subtle inconsistencies in company reports, delayed contracts, overbilled shipments, invoices paid to shell corporations, he hesitated, not because he didn't know what it meant, but because trust was a currency he couldn't afford to lose. Still, he kept the files, quietly, cautiously. Names, accounts, dates. He didn't go to the authorities, not yet. He went to Warren. It was a Wednesday. 9:15 p.m. The office was quiet. The glass reflected only city lights and Lucas's own nerves. Warren was nursing a tumbler of scotch, eyes fixed on a report. But he didn't look surprised when Lucas placed the folder on his desk. "I found discrepancies," Lucas said, his voice low. "Multiple, all tied to the same internal channels." Warren looked up, studied him. For a long, cold second, neither of them spoke. Then, "Do you know what you just stepped into?" Lucas didn't answer. Warren nodded, like he'd expected that. "Good. Keep this between us. If anyone asks, this conversation never happened." Lucas left that night with a knot in his gut. Because the man who had once said he hired people with scars now looked like someone who had handed out most of them. In hindsight, Lucas would never know if Warren had planned to act on the evidence or if someone else found out first. Because 2 weeks later, Warren Arkell was dead, and Lucas was in handcuffs. It had been raining the day Lucas first saw him. Not a dramatic storm, just a slow, stubborn drizzle that turned sidewalks into mirrors and made the sky feel closer than usual, like it was pressing down. He wasn't supposed to be there. Not really. The animal shelter on 43rd and Langston had no relevance to Arkell systems, to corporate agendas, or to national defense. But Lucas had passed it every day on his walk home. And something about the silence behind those chain-link fences had always tugged at him. That afternoon, something pulled stronger. Inside, the air smelled like bleach and resignation. Metal kennels lined both sides of a narrow hallway, each one holding a soul forgotten by someone else. Puppies barked. Small dogs yipped and spun, but at the very end, in the last enclosure quiet, a German shepherd, lean to the point of angular, sat pressed into the corner, not growling, not begging, just watching. Lucas paused. The intake form clipped to the front read, "Male, approx. 2 years, found in industrial zone, history unknown, not responding well to handlers. Euthanasia scheduled Friday." It was Thursday. He crouched. "Hey, boy." The dog didn't move, didn't blink. Only after a full minute did the tail twitch. Not a wag, just acknowledgement. Lucas didn't overthink it. Maybe because his own life had been a series of rescue attempts, some successful, some not. He stood, walked straight to the front desk, and filled out the forms. That night, the apartment was quiet. Cale, he'd named him that on the ride home, paced along the walls, sniffed corners, then retreated to the farthest point from the door. Lucas didn't force anything. He laid out a blanket, set a bowl of water beside it, sat on the couch with a book he didn't read. Midnight came, still no trust. Then, around 2:00 a.m., he felt it. Weight, not much, just a paw. Cale had curled beside him on the floor, resting his head on Lucas's foot. A breath, a shift, a silent contract written without words. Weeks passed. Evenings became routine. Lucas, in a hoodie, Cale at his side walking along the riverbank that carved the city in two. The shepherd didn't pull or bark. He just trotted half a step behind, eyes always scanning, like he understood that watching was a form of protection. Some days, Lucas would speak. Not full conversations, just thoughts, memories, regrets too small for anyone else to hear. Cale never answered, but he always listened. One night, after a rough meeting at Arkell, tense questions, sideways glances, the quiet feeling of being out of place in a place he'd fought to belong. Lucas came home and sat on the floor. Didn't move, didn't eat. Cale approached, nudged his shoulder, then laid across his lap, his entire weight pressed against Lucas's chest like an anchor. And for the first time in years, Lucas let his head fall, let the stillness crack. He cried, and Cale didn't flinch. There was something in Cale's presence, something Lucas couldn't quantify. The way the dog always woke 1 second before his alarm. The way he paced the room before Lucas opened his inbox and saw another internal email laced with cold suspicion. The way Cale would plant himself in front of the door when Lucas hesitated on his way to work, as if to say, "You don't have to go if it's going to break you." Cale wasn't a pet. He was a compass, a pulse check on reality, the last voice of instinct in a world that had taught Lucas to question everything. One Sunday morning, Lucas found himself staring out at the river while Cale watched ducks circle beneath the overpass. He turned to the dog and murmured, "They say you can't really save something broken." Cale turned, ears alert. Lucas chuckled bitterly. "Shows what they know." Cale walked forward, bumped Lucas's hand with his snout, then sat down beside him. No leash, no command, just trust. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a movie. But in that quiet stretch of land, with Cale at his side, Lucas had found something he hadn't even realized he was missing. Belonging. The night it all fell apart, the city skyline was unusually clear. No rain, no wind, just stillness, like the world had paused to hold its breath. Lucas stood alone in the executive wing of Arkel Systems. It was nearly midnight, but the lights on the 41st floor still burned. His badge had cleared security without a hitch, just like every other late night he'd spent reviewing documents or prepping for Warren's next whirlwind trip to D.C. But this time was different. This time, something was wrong the moment he stepped into Warren Arkel's office. The lamp on the corner desk was on, casting soft amber light across papers. The door hadn't been locked, and the smell something metallic, faint but unmistakable. Lucas's eyes swept the room, and then he saw him. Warren. Slumped behind the desk, shirt rumpled, eyes half open in a vacant stare. A pool of blood had formed beneath the edge of the leather chair. It hadn't soaked into the carpet yet, too fresh. Lucas didn't move. For a full 5 seconds he just stood there, heartbeat flattening into static, mind trying to slow the chaos spiraling behind his eyes. Then instinct. He rushed forward. "Mr. Arkel?" He touched his mentor's shoulder. Cold, his hand slipped on something. A letter opener chrome, engraved with Arkel Systems insignia, drenched in red. He jerked back. The letter opener clattered to the ground. And that's when the door opened. They said it was a call tip, an anonymous alert. By the time security arrived, Lucas was on his knees beside the body, blood on his shirt, fingerprints on the weapon. It didn't matter that he'd tried to help. Didn't matter that he'd shouted for someone to call an ambulance even when it was clearly too late. The narrative wrote itself. Too clean. Too quick. Interrogation came within hours. "What was your relationship with Warren Arkel?" "He was my mentor." "Were you aware you were the sole beneficiary of a recent change in his private will?" "No." "That doesn't make sense." "Do you deny receiving a deposit of $2.3 million from a Cayman-based account earlier this week?" "I didn't." "What account?" "We have the record." Lucas stared at the printed bank statement on the table. His name, his signature. A time-stamped transfer just 48 hours before Warren's death. "I didn't authorize that." "Your credentials say otherwise." They showed him surveillance footage, grainy black and white. Lucas entering the office at 10:47 p.m. Warren already seated at his desk. No struggle, no words, just static, then darkness. The feed cut out for nearly 3 full minutes. When it returned, Warren was slumped. Lucas was kneeling, and that was all the jury ever needed. But Lucas remembered things differently. He remembered an email from Warren that morning. "We'll talk tonight. You were right about the inconsistencies." He remembered a light flickering in the hallway on the way in, a glitch that had never happened before. He remembered a drawer in Warren's desk open that shouldn't have been, a file folder missing. The look in Warren's eyes frozen not in fear, but surprise. Like he hadn't seen it coming either, like the betrayal had come from someone else. Behind bars, weeks later, Lucas kept asking the same question. Why was it so easy? Why did no one question the footage? Why did the autopsy disappear from internal reports? Why did Trevor Arkel Warren's son vanish from corporate records and reappear in Switzerland? Why did no one ask about the real motive? And the answer came slowly, like dust settling in a shaft of light. Because someone had planned for it to be easy. Cale had barked the night before. Low, long, unsettled. Lucas had ignored it, too buried in his notes, too eager to show Warren what he'd found. When the police took Lucas away, Cale had chased the van until his paws bled. They said dogs know. They said dogs always know. And maybe Kyle did. Maybe that night the dog had felt the storm coming before Lucas even saw the clouds. But by the time Lucas understood, it was too late. The collapse wasn't loud. It was quiet, efficient, surgical, like someone had practiced it before. At exactly 5:05 a.m., the metal slot on the cell door clanked open and the tray slid in. Oatmeal again. Lukewarm, gummy, a plastic spoon stabbed into the center like a flag in foreign soil. Lucas didn't look up. He hadn't looked up in years. Not when the guards made their rounds, not when the shouts echoed from cell block D during yard incidents, not when another inmate whispered, "Dead man walkin'," every time the lights flickered at night. He had learned that eye contact was currency here, and Lucas had nothing left to spend. The cell was 8 feet by 10, a bed bolted to concrete, a sink the color of rusted coins, a toilet that groaned like it resented every flush. But Lucas didn't complain. He didn't scream, didn't lash out, didn't scrawl messages on the walls or curse the system that had buried him alive. He simply existed. Push-ups every morning, 200 before breakfast, a way to stay sane, to burn time, to remind his body it was still his. He counted in silence. He breathed in memories. The echo of Kyle's nails against hardwood, the soft thump of a tail on the couch cushion beside him. The way Kyle had once pressed his head against Lucas's chest during a thunderstorm, no fear, just presence. That memory came often. Lucas had stopped keeping a calendar after year 1. What was the point? Every day was the same. Same food, same lights, same silence. Except Tuesdays. On Tuesdays, he heard the bark. It wasn't real. He knew that. It was too distant, too perfect, always the same timbre, like it was carved from inside his mind. But still, every Tuesday at 3:13 p.m., as the hallway fan kicked on and drowned the world in static, he'd hear it. One bark, one syllable of the past. They said death row changed a man. Lucas disagreed. Death row didn't change you. It revealed what you really were when the world stopped looking. And he was a man who waited for truth, waited for Kyle, waited for something to break the silence. Once, in the 2nd year, he'd received a letter, a short note, written in slanted, shaky ink. Kyle's with me. Still waits by the door every night. You're not forgotten. A. He'd stared at it for hours. Alina. The girl who still believed he wasn't a killer. The girl who hadn't been able to say goodbye at the trial. The girl who now kept the only piece of him worth keeping alive. Lucas folded the letter and tucked it behind the chipped mirror above his sink. Not to read it again, but to feel its presence. In here, hope was more dangerous than anger. It made the air thinner, the nights longer. But it also kept him from forgetting Kyle's eyes, amber, alert, always watching. It kept him from surrendering to the hollowness. Once a month, the priest would visit. You can speak, Lucas. No one will hear but God. But Lucas never did, because if he spoke, the silence would end. And Kyle's bark, the one thing left that was his, might vanish. Some nights he dreamed of walking along the riverbank again, Kyle beside him. No leash, just trust. The trees swaying, the wind clean. He'd wake up with tears he never remembered crying. He never wiped them, let them dry. Let them sting. Let them remind him he was still a man, not just a number in a box. 5 years, a new guard muttered once, loud enough for Lucas to hear. Man hasn't said more than 3 words. Creepy. They didn't understand. Silence wasn't surrender. Silence was control. In a world that had stripped him of everything, Lucas had chosen the one thing they couldn't take. His voice. He'd give it back one day. For Caleb. For the truth. But not yet. Not until the silence itself begged to be broken. The buzz of fluorescent lights overhead was constant, unblinking. They cast everything in a cold blue walls, metal chairs, and faces that no longer knew how to soften. Lucas sat across from the only man who still called him by his first name. Martin Lang, public defender. Gray around the edges, suit 2 decades too old, briefcase cracked at the handle. He carried the look of someone who had learned to survive off apologies, never his own. "Appeal's dead," Martin said, flipping shut the thin manila folder. "State Supreme rejected the motion, and the feds won't touch it. No DNA, no witness recantation, no leverage." Lucas didn't move, didn't sigh, didn't nod, just kept staring at the empty corner of the room where a clock used to be. Martin exhaled. "We're out of moves, Lucas. I'm sorry." Still no reply. The older man leaned forward, voice lowering like a priest's before a confession. "Is there anything you want to say? Anything left undone?" Lucas blinked slowly. The cuffs around his wrists clinked faintly when he moved his hands toward the table. He didn't ask about Warren Arkell. He didn't ask about the missing money or the altered tapes. He asked only one thing. "Don't let them forget Caleb." Martin froze. Lucas's voice after all this time was a rusted hinge, rough, dry, quiet enough to make the lights feel louder. Martin swallowed. "Caleb, the dog." Lucas nodded once. "He matters." That was the last time Martin ever saw Lucas in person. 2 weeks later, he submitted a visitation request, this time on behalf of Alina. It came back denied. No explanation, just a stamped "denied" across the top, as impersonal as a parking ticket. "Special conditions," the guard had told him. "Ward's orders, no civilians." He didn't fight it, not out loud, because fighting meant caring. And too many years on cases like this had taught him care was a liability in a world that ran on procedure. Lucas received the rejection slip folded in half under his breakfast tray. He read it once. No reaction. But that night, the memory came back. Alina's fingers brushing Kael's ear at the edge of the porch, the sound of Kael's low hum, that soft, satisfied sigh only dogs make when they're exactly where they belong. Lucas had watched them from the doorway that night, thinking, "This is peace. This is all I need." Now even that memory felt endangered. Later that month, a postcard came. A photograph of Caleb in the backyard, sitting, patient, still. No message, just a return address. Lucas stared at it for hours, fingers tracing the outline of the dog's silhouette, the only soul who still waited. Martin never returned to the prison. But he started sending newsletters, clippings of articles, social media threads, editorials about Caleb, pieces that mentioned the dog who wouldn't move from the door, the dog who didn't know what it meant to give up. Lucas taped them to his wall. In a place where color didn't exist, Caleb's printed eyes were the only warmth. He whispered his name before sleep, every night. Caleb, like a prayer, like a vow. So even if the world forgot, Lucas wouldn't. The house creaked more than it used to. Every change in weather seemed to echo through the old beams like distant thunder. Alina stood at the kitchen sink, her left hand wrapped around a cup of chamomile tea, the other rubbing slow circles against her rib cage where the pain had settled again. She didn't need the scan results to tell her what her body already knew. Lymphoma. Persistent. Stubborn. Like everything else in her life. Outside, Kael sat on the back porch, exactly where he did every morning. Same position, same posture, facing the driveway, as if waiting for someone to pull in. His ears would twitch at every car passing 2 blocks away. His tail would lift, hover, then lower again. 5 years, and he hadn't unlearned hope. The vet had warned her. German shepherds mourn in silence. If he doesn't recover from the separation, it'll begin to wear him down, organ by organ. But Kael didn't break. He just waited. That, somehow, was worse. She fed him by hand now, not because he was frail, but because it gave her an excuse to sit beside him and speak out loud in a house that had grown too quiet. "He'd laugh at how picky you've gotten," she whispered one night, holding out a piece of boiled chicken. "Used to be you'd eat dryer lint if Lucas dropped it on the floor." Kael didn't bark. He simply licked her hand, then pressed his head against her knee. She froze. It was the first time in months he'd initiated contact. She didn't move until her legs went numb. Alina had met Lucas at Arkell Systems. She was in user research. He was the founder's assistant. They had bonded over late-night takeout and shared silences that felt full instead of awkward. When he brought Kael home the first time, the dog barked at her relentlessly, until she tripped on the doorstep and burst out laughing. Kael had wagged his tail once. That had been the beginning. Now the laughter was gone, replaced by clinic visits, fatigue, and moments when her vision dimmed just enough to make her grip the walls. Still, she never missed a feeding, never skipped a walk. Kael needed consistency, and she needed Kael. Sometimes she talked to Lucas through Kael. "Tell him I still keep the porch light on." Or, "Let him know we walk the river path every Thursday like always. You still lead the way." Kael would tilt his head, one ear raised, eyes fixed on her mouth as if translating syllables into memory. She believed he carried those messages. She had to. A few times a local reporter came by. Word had spread about the dog who waited. They wanted photos, stories, a headline. She refused. Kael's loyalty wasn't a curiosity. It was sacred. One night she found a small box by the door, no note. Inside, a framed photo of Kael and Lucas walking by the water, taken from behind, peaceful, whole. She cried for the first time in months, and placed it by the window where Kael could see it. By year 4, she couldn't climb stairs anymore. Kael adjusted. He moved his vigil from the upstairs landing to the foot of her bed, never once whining, never once needing to be told. When her breath hitched from the pain, Kael would rest his chin on her arm until it steadied. He was no longer a service dog, but he had never stopped serving. On especially hard nights, Alina would whisper into his fur, "If anything happens to me, you find him. You hear me?" Kael never looked away. He didn't need to nod. She knew he understood. And somewhere 300 miles away, in a room with no clocks and no sky, Lucas sat on a narrow cot, staring at the photograph of Kael taped to the wall. The photo was bent at the corners now. But the dog in it still looked forward, still waiting, still watching. It was supposed to be a good morning. For the first time in weeks, Alina had slept through the night without waking from pain or coughing fits. A soft rain tapped against the window pane, the kind of early spring drizzle that usually lulled Cale into curling beside the heater instead of demanding his pre-dawn walk. But the silence was wrong, not peaceful hollow. She sat up in bed, blinking into the gray morning light. "Cale?" she called, voice hoarse. No sound of claws on tile, no rustle of fur shifting on the hallway rug, no answering whine from the kitchen. A chill wrapped around her lungs. She shoved aside the blanket and reached for the cane beside her nightstand. Her legs, slow from treatment and weariness, protested each step, but dread moved her faster than strength ever could. The kitchen door was half open, just enough to let in the damp scent of rain and soil. "Cale!" she called again, louder. Still nothing. She hobbled to the back patio, heart thudding. The leash, the thick blue nylon one Lucas had used back when Cale was still learning to heel lay on the porch. But not whole. It was shredded, cut through like a ribbon, the edges jagged and frayed. The gate to the yard stood ajar, creaking slightly in the wind. She didn't breathe, couldn't. He never left. Not in 5 years, not once. Not even when other dogs barked from the fences or when she forgot to close the fridge and he could have devoured half a roasted chicken. Cale stayed because staying was what he did. She collapsed into the patio chair, trembling, staring at the broken leash in her hands. It didn't make sense. No thunder, no crash, no signs of struggle, just absence. Like he had vanished into the fog that hung low over the grass. And then something worse dawned on her. Today was the visit. Lucas had been granted a final meeting before the execution date reset, before another appeal could be filed. A rare exception. And she was supposed to take Cale to see him. It was the only thing keeping Lucas breathing. And Cale had known. She was sure of it. A noise startled her, a clatter at the front gate. She rushed faster than she should have, ignoring the pain. A delivery van, wrong address. The driver offered an awkward wave, then drove off. The moment dissolved into meaningless distraction, but her pulse didn't slow. She staggered back inside, limbs shaking. Phone. She needed her phone. Alina snatched it from the counter, fingers fumbling as she pulled up contacts. She hesitated. Jack Lennox. A name she hadn't said aloud in years. The same man who once helped put Lucas behind bars. But if Cale was missing, really missing, there was no time for pride. She hit call. It rang 3 times. "Hello?" A gruff voice answered. Older, weary, but alert. "Jack, it's Alina. I need help." Silence. "Cale's gone," she said. "This morning. The leash was... The gate's open. I think someone took him." "Jesus," Jack whispered. "When?" "Less than an hour ago, maybe." I don't know. I was asleep." "Have you called animal control? The police?" "No. He's not just a missing dog, Jack. He's the only witness to the truth. And Lucas, today was the visit." Jack cursed under his breath. "Stay put. I'll be there in 20. Alina hung up and stared at the empty hallway. Cale's bowl was still half full. His favorite ball was under the table. The blanket he always dragged near the heater lay untouched. The absence screamed louder than any broken window could. She slid to the floor, weak and sweating, the cane clattering beside her. She pressed her forehead to the cold tile, one hand over her heart. "Please," she whispered into the silence. "Please come back." Outside, the rain picked up, but a single muddy paw print remained on the edge of the porch, pointed away from the house, toward the river path, and toward whatever waited in the dark. Jack Lennox hadn't answered a call before 9 a.m. since the day he turned in his badge. His mornings followed a predictable rhythm, now black coffee, half a grapefruit, and the daily crossword spread out beneath the same lamp his wife once read under. That lamp hadn't been turned off since she passed. Neither had his guilt. So when the name Caleb Merrick lit up on the burner phone he kept buried in the kitchen drawer, something inside him jolted. Not like a memory, more like a summons. He didn't hesitate, didn't need to. "Hello?" he said, voice still groggy but alert, a breath on the other end, fragile, shaken. "Jack, it's Alina. I need help." Silence stretched, and then her words poured out, sharp and breathless, like someone running out of oxygen. "Cale's gone. This morning. I woke up. The leash was torn. The gate was open. There's no sign of him, Jack. No barking. No noise. I think someone took him." Jack gripped the counter until his knuckles turned white. "Where are you now?" "At home. I haven't called the police." "Good," Jack interrupted, already moving to his coat. "Don't. Not yet." He still remembered Cale. More than once he'd stared into that dog's eyes across the courtroom and thought, "That mutt knows more than all of us combined." Back then, Cale had been evidence, Exhibit C in a case stacked so neatly it practically convicted itself. But even Jack, then a lead investigator with the DA's Major Crimes Unit, had felt something off. Lucas wasn't dumb, ambitious maybe, stubborn, but not stupid enough to leave every single trace pointing at him. Still, the pieces fit too cleanly, so Jack stopped questioning. Until now. "Tell me exactly what you saw," he said, as he slid behind the wheel of his aging Crown Vic, the kind of car that smelled permanently of leather and unfinished cases. Alina's voice cracked. "I didn't see anything. I just woke up and he was gone. No barking, no scratching, just gone." "Cut leash, open gate, no struggle," Jack muttered, repeating the bullet points aloud. "Means one thing, whoever did this knew the dog, knew how to keep him quiet." "And he never runs," Alina added. "Never. Not once in 5 years." Jack rubbed a hand down his face. "Which means he either followed someone he trusted or someone forced him." Neither option gave him comfort. 25 minutes later, Jack pulled up to Alina's worn brick house. The porch was soaked. A single muddy paw print, partially smudged, still clung to the bottom step. Alina opened the door before he knocked. Her face was pale, eyes red-rimmed, cheeks hollowed by too many sleepless nights and not enough food. But beneath the frailty, she held herself with something stronger. Resolve. She handed him the broken leash without a word. He turned it over in his hands, frowning. "This wasn't chewed," he murmured. "It was sliced. Box cutter or surgical blade fast, clean, no fray." Alina nodded. "I thought so." He looked at her. "Anyone else know about today's visit?" She hesitated. "Just the warden, Lucas's attorney, and me." Jack's frown deepened. "That's not enough to leak, unless someone wanted that dog out of the picture before he got near the prison." Alina's fingers trembled. "You don't think he ran away?" Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. Inside, Cale's blanket still lay crumpled near the heater, his bowl untouched. No signs of a fight, no forced entry. Jack knelt near the back gate, inspecting the latch. "No damage," he murmured. "Opened from the inside. Quiet. Clean." He stood and scanned the horizon. Beyond the backyard, a trail snaked toward the riverbank, a faint path, but it could hide prints if they were lucky. "I'll need his scent," Jack said. Alina went inside and returned with Kyl's collar. Still warm, still smelling faintly of cedar, rain, and dog. Jack tucked it in his coat pocket. "We'll find him," he said. She looked up, tired hope flickering in her eyes. "Even if it's too late?" He paused. "Then we find the truth. Either way." On the drive toward the riverbank, Jack couldn't help but remember the last conversation he'd had with Lucas during the trial. "You're wrong about me," Lucas had said, shackled, eyes steady. Jack had shrugged. "Tell it to the jury." Lucas had only smiled, bitter and quiet. "One day, Cale will." At the time, Jack had chalked it up to desperation. Now it sounded like prophecy. He rolled down the window as they neared the edge of the trail. The rain had eased, but the ground was soft ideal for prints if they moved fast. He handed Alina a flashlight and tightened his jacket. "From here on," he said, "we walk." Alina glanced up. "Where?" Jack nodded toward the woods. "Wherever Kyle went." The trees stood hushed under a bruised sky, as if they too were listening. Jack Lennox moved slowly, eyes on the ground, flashlight beams sweeping in wide arcs across the dirt trail. The scent of wet pine and river mud clung to the morning like grief. Alina followed just behind him, Kyle's blanket bundled in her arms like a lifeline. She wasn't speaking anymore, only breathing fast, shallow, worried. They reached the first bend in the trail, where the grass thinned and the earth gave way to riverstone. That's when Jack stopped. "Prince," he said quietly. Alina leaned in. The indentation was faint but unmistakable. The splay of canine toes, deep heel marked Kyle's stride, no question. But a few inches behind it, something else. "Boots," Jack muttered, kneeling. "Worn, big, probably size 11. Pattern matches law enforcement issue or military surplus. See the pressure here? They were walking fast, maybe dragging." Alina swallowed hard. Dragging? Not struggling, but hurried, controlled, like someone who knew how to handle a dog and expected to. Jack turned, scanning the brush line. "We're not chasing a runaway. We're chasing a handler." 20 minutes in, the path dipped toward the river, where the trees broke apart in a narrow clearing. A faded bench sat under a willow, rotting with age, and near it, something glinted. Jack crouched again, this time more urgently. It was a buckle, snapped clean, the end frayed not by teeth, but sliced through the metal itself. Beside it, the broken end of a leash slick with mud, but unmistakable. "Industrial blade," Jack muttered. "Probably utility grade, not something you use casually. Whoever did this knew what they were cutting and had the tools for it." Alina's voice trembled. "Why take Kyle? What would they want from him?" Jack stood slowly, turning the buckle over in his palm. "If you knew Cale held a secret one that could unravel the story you built, you'd do whatever it took to silence him." A low rustle startled them both. Jack snapped his flashlight toward the sound. Something darted into the undergrowth, too quick to be Cale, too quiet to be random. "Stay here," he told Alina, drawing a small revolver from his coat pocket. She didn't argue. He stepped carefully toward the thicket, the brush parting like breath through mist. His heart was hammering, not from fear, but from something older, colder, instinct, the kind of dread that only years of chasing lies could teach you. Then he saw it. A torn scrap of cloth snagged on a thorn bush. Gray. Standard issue prison laundry bag, but no name, no logo, just blood-smudged and recent. Fresh, he muttered. Whoever's ahead of us isn't far. He turned back. Alina, get your phone out. We need photos. And we need to move. By the time they reached the edge of the woods, the trail had split one path leading toward the industrial yards, the other winding deeper into the underpass system that ran beneath Arkell Systems' old warehouse district. Jack pointed. That way, he said, choosing the yard. Concrete will kill the tracks, but they'll need cover. That warehouse abandoned since the shutdown, perfect for hiding a dog or a secret. They approached in silence. The warehouse loomed like a wounded animal, jagged windows, rusted siding, the stench of mildew and rot leaking from every seam. A storm drain gurgled nearby, echoing their footsteps. Jack raised a hand. They stopped. A sound inside, not a bark, not a growl, a whimper. Alina's breath caught. "Kyle," she whispered. They entered cautiously. The air was thick with dust and damp iron. Shafts of light cut through the broken roof, illuminating old crates, rusted machinery, and, near the back wall, a chain. Kyle, tethered, muzzled, eyes wide with recognition the second he saw Alina. He lunged, tail thrashing, body vibrating with contained urgency. The chain scraped metal against stone. "Oh my God," Alina sobbed, rushing forward. "Kyle, wait!" Jack barked, holding her back. He approached first, scanning for tripwires, cameras, any sign of surveillance. But it was just Cale alone, alert, and shaking with a silent plea. Jack knelt and removed the muzzle gently. The dog didn't snap, didn't growl, just leaned forward, touching his nose to Jack's hand, then turned toward Alina. "He's okay," Jack said, releasing the collar from the chain. That's when he noticed it. Taped to the inside of Cale's harness, neatly secured with medical-grade adhesive, was a USB drive. Jack's face went pale. "Someone left this here on purpose." "Do you think he was meant to be found?" Alina whispered. Jack looked up, eyes dark. "No, I think someone changed their mind." As they ran back through the woods, Kyle now freed and leading the way, the light had changed. Brighter, harsher. The urgency wasn't just emotional, it was legal, existential. They didn't know what was on the drive. Not yet. But Jack had a gut feeling. This wasn't just a dog. Cale had been carrying the truth all along, and now, for the first time in 5 years, it had a chance to speak. The morning fog clung to the gravel paths of the old Arkell Systems utility lot like a ghost that refused to lift. It was the kind of cold that got into your teeth, not just your bones. Alina zipped her coat to her throat as she followed Jack through the rusting service gate, the hinges shrieking like they hadn't moved in years. Cale padded beside them, head low, nose twitching, his every breath a question. "This place used to be a secondary utilities depot," Jack muttered, scanning the crumbling brick structures and overgrown rail tracks. After Arkell Systems downsized, they mothballed this entire yard. No surveillance, no security. Perfect place to stash something. Or someone. Alina nodded, her eyes trailing over the peeling paint on the side of a squat building marked Maintenance, East Shed. One of the windows had been cracked. Another was boarded up. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, like someone had just stepped out. Kyle stiffened. "Jack," Alina said, tension threading her voice. He'd already seen it. Fresh boot prints in the dew-covered gravel, too clean, too new, and next to them, paw prints, large, deep, Kyle's. They approached the shed slowly. Jack's hand hovered near the grip of his revolver just in case. Kyle stayed close, but his ears were alert now, posture taut. The scent of diesel and damp wood filled the air. "Look," Alina whispered, pointing. On the side of the shed, a series of scratches along the paint-parallel grooves, about shoulder-high to a standing dog. "Kyle tried to get in," she murmured. Jack crouched beside the door, examining the lock. It had been tampered with, sloppily. Whoever broke in wasn't careful, just desperate. He gave the door a push. It groaned open reluctantly. Inside, empty shelving, rotted tools, a pile of shredded tarp in the corner, and a lingering smell. Musky. Not just dog. Something chemical. Bleach, maybe. "They kept him here," Jack said grimly. "Bound him, prepped him, then moved him." Cale sniffed frantically at the pile of tarp, then barked once, a sharp, clipped sound. He backed up, ears twitching, then turned to the open door. "Something else?" Alina asked. "No," Jack said, already following the dog. "Someone else." They emerged to find a man leaning against a faded tractor across the lot. Older, sinewy, with a reflective vest and a jaw working over a toothpick like it held a grudge. He didn't look surprised to see them. "You folks don't look like you're here for parts," he said, voice low and lined with gravel. Jack stepped forward, badge from his PI license briefly flashing. "Lennox, investigator? You work the grounds?" "Some days, when the check's clear." "We're looking for a man who may have been here this morning, early, around dawn, with a German shepherd." The groundskeeper didn't blink, just looked at Cale, then back to Jack. "Might have." Alina leaned forward. "Please. He's not just a dog. He's all we've got left." The man chewed a second longer, then spat. "Was a weird thing," he said finally. "I came in around 5 to check the lines. Guy was already here, tall, hoodie, kept to the shadows, but I got a look. Military buzz cut. He had that dog-ear-dog, I guess, chained to a post behind the east shed. Dog looked half-starved." Jack tensed. "Did he say anything?" "Not to me. Just kept looking at the old transformer box like it owed him something. When I tried to get closer, he whistled, real low. The dog went still. That's when I figured he wasn't some junkie or squatter, too controlled." "Which way did he go?" The man jerked a thumb south. "Toward the old shipping warehouse. Place is condemned, but there's a crawl space that leads to the back lot. Most folks around here don't know about it." "Did you call it in?" He hesitated. "Didn't seem worth it. Dog was gone when I passed back 10 minutes later. Looked like the guy had vanished into thin air." Jack nodded. "You did now. Thanks." As they turned, the groundskeeper added, "You know, that dog didn't bark once. Not even when I got close. Just stared like he was waiting for something." Jack didn't look back. He was. Back at the shed, Cale was standing at the edge of the trailhead, tail stiff, nose to the dirt. His entire body pointed due south toward the warehouse district. Jack met Alina's eyes. "You ready for this?" "No," she whispered. "But I trust him." They followed Kyle into the trees, leaving the shed behind them like a shed layer of skin. Something had shifted in the air, not relief, not hope. Movement. Kyle's steps grew faster. The truth wasn't buried anymore. It was running, and they had to catch it before it disappeared again. The warehouse loomed like a carcass from another time, its corrugated steel ribs rusting beneath the gray sky, its windows shattered like hollow eyes that had long stopped watching. Years of wind had stripped away any pretense of purpose, leaving only bones, dust, and silence. But to Kyle, Something still lived here, something worth chasing. His nose skimmed the gravel path, paws careful yet eager. Each footprint ahead, half faded but present, seemed to echo with urgency. Jack kept a hand on his sidearm as they approached the main bay doors. "Arkell Systems used to ship military tech through here," he said. "After the scandal with the missile contracts, this place went dark. Nobody's had eyes on it in years." Alina said nothing. She was too focused on Kyle, who'd stopped now. His body tense, ears high, tail rigid. He gave a low whine and stepped toward the corner where the rusted gate had peeled inward. A makeshift entrance. Fresh. Jack crouched, inspecting the metal. Someone pried this open from the outside. Didn't even try to be subtle. Kyle didn't wait. He slipped inside, swallowed by the dark. The interior was a cathedral of dust and echoes. Sunlight pierced through high cracks in the roof, slanting down like fading memories. Debris littered the floor-splintered pallets, cracked crates, abandoned shipping manifests strewn like the aftermath of a forgotten war. But Kyle moved with certainty. He trotted forward, paws silent over dirt and gravel, nose twitching toward the far wall. "There," Alina said, pointing. In a dim corner beneath a broken rafter beam, Kyle stopped. He didn't bark, didn't move, just stood still, staring. Jack and Alina moved quickly, hearts thudding louder than their footsteps. And there he was, Kyle, or rather a version of him they hadn't expected to see. Bound. His legs tethered to an old steel anchor with a climbing carabiner and paracord. A torn fleece blanket lay beneath him, soaked in old rainwater. His eyes were open, tired, hollowed. But when he saw Alina, something shifted. A spark, recognition, hope. "Kale!" she gasped, dropping to her knees. He didn't whine. He pressed his forehead to her hand and let out a slow exhale. Jack knelt beside them, inspecting the knots. Slipknot rig. Fast release, fast escape. This wasn't about hurting him. It was about using him. He tugged once, and the cord gave way. Kale was free. That's when Alina noticed it taped beneath his collar. A thin rectangle wrapped in black electrical tape, blinking faintly. A USB drive. "What the hell?" she whispered. Jack peeled it off carefully. Whoever brought him here wanted this found, and wanted it found by us. Alina held Kyle's face between her hands, whispering, "You brought it. You carried it all the way here." Kyle blinked slowly. Not broken, not defeated, delivered. Jack stood and looked around. "We need to get out of here, now, before whoever left him here decides to come back for the evidence." Kyle tried to stand, stumbled once, then steadied himself. His movements were slow, but there was no hesitation. The tether was gone. He was walking out on his own. As they guided him toward the light filtering from the broken entrance, Alina turned back for one last glance. That warehouse had seen secrets, shadows, but today it had given something back. Outside, the sky had begun to shift storm clouds gathering in the distance like a warning. Kale lifted his nose to the wind and let out one soft bark. Jack slid the USB into a protective pouch in his jacket. "Let's hope this is the thread that unravels it all." Alina looked down at Kale, then at Jack. "I don't think it's just hope anymore." They didn't look back. They walked toward the car, toward the truth, and toward the last few hours they had left to save a man from a death that should never have been scheduled. The USB drive clicked into Jack's old laptop with a faint, final-sounding snap. They were parked a few blocks from the warehouse now, tucked behind an abandoned diner whose windows were dusted with grime and forgotten time. Kyle lay curled in the back seat, still weak, but alert eyes never leaving Alina. Jack's fingers hovered for a breath before pressing play. And then it began. The video was grainy at first, like all security footage, a warehouse office with beige walls, cluttered desks, a flickering wall clock frozen at 11:24 p.m. Warren Arkle sat in a leather chair, sleeves rolled up, shoulders heavy. He looked tired, the kind of tired you didn't wake up from. The door opened. Trevor Arkle stepped in. Designer coat, polished shoes, the kind of calm only sociopaths wore like armor. Jack leaned closer. No sound at first, only timestamp ticks, then voices. "You've cost us everything," Warren said. "The DOJ's crawling now. You need to come forward. Tell them it was you." A pause. Then Trevor's voice, silky, detached. "Dad, you never understood. You built a kingdom, but I was born to rule it." And then, in a flash of motion, Trevor lunged forward, grabbing the paperweight first, then the letter opener from the desk. The blade disappeared into Warren's chest with brutal, efficient force. Once. Twice. Jack clenched his jaw. Alina covered her mouth. But Trevor wasn't finished. He grabbed his father's hand, wiped it over the letter opener, then calmly walked over to the desk, inserted a USB stick, and began deleting files. The last thing he did was pick up the office's security panel remote and reprogram the timestamp. The video ended. For a moment, the only sound in the car was Kael's breathing. Alina's voice trembled. "They knew. They knew the whole time." Jack closed the laptop gently, like it might break beneath the weight of what it held. "This," he said, "isn't just proof, it's a goddamn confession." He met Alina's eyes. "We need to get this to the prison now." She nodded, already starting the ignition. The drive began in silence. Rain had started to fall, soft at first, then heavier. It slicked the roads like oil, turned traffic lights into blurred halos, and painted the world in slow-moving streaks of red and white. Jack stared straight ahead, knuckles white against the laptop he now held like a loaded gun. Kael shifted slightly in the back seat, pressing his head against Alina's shoulder. She reached back, fingers slipping into his fur. "He's holding up better than I am," she murmured, voice tight. Jack glanced at the clock. 7:46 p.m. The prison's intake deadline was 9 o'clock p.m. sharp. After that, nothing, not even God, could interrupt the execution protocol without a federal injunction. "We're gonna make it," he said, more to himself than her. The windshield wipers thudded in rhythm with his heartbeat. Halfway through the freeway, Jack's phone buzzed. Blocked number. He frowned and answered on speaker. "Lennox," he barked. Static. Then a voice. "You're making a mistake." Jack froze. "Who is this?" "Turn around, it's already done. Don't make yourself part of it." Click. The call died. Jack stared at the screen, then tossed the phone onto the dash like it burned. "They're watching," he muttered. "They know we found it." Alina didn't flinch. "They should be afraid." The rain thickened as they passed the last green sign, Ravenhurst State Penitentiary, 38 miles. The world outside blurred, but inside the car, everything sharpened. Jack reviewed the plan. "We show them the USB. Demand to see Warden Stone. You explain how Kael was found. I'll handle the chain of custody. They can't ignore this." Alina exhaled. "What if they try?" He looked at her, voice steel. "Then we make it impossible." Behind them, Kael lifted his head, ears tilting forward. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Jack added softly, Lucas has no idea what's coming, Alina whispered. He just needs to hold on. They reached the prison gates at 8:41 p.m. Barely 19 minutes left. Floodlights bathed the compound in cold, sterile white. Razor wire curled above stone walls like coiled serpents. Protesters flanked both sides of the entrance, some waving anti-death penalty signs, others shouting for vengeance. Jack rolled down his window, flashed his retired law enforcement ID. The guard stepped forward. "No visitors allowed past this point." "We're not visiting," Jack snapped. "We're here on a death stay emergency. Warden Stone knows me. Tell him Jack Lennox is at the gate with physical evidence in a capital case." The guard hesitated. Then, to Jack's surprise, Cale growled, low, deep, intentional. It startled the guard enough to make him retreat a step. Jack leaned out. "Move! Now!" Seconds later, the gate creaked open. They were waved toward the intake checkpoint, past an outer building that hummed with tension. Jack tucked the USB into an evidence bag he'd brought. Old habit. Alina tightened her coat around her. The wind had picked up, cold and sharp, as if time itself had teeth. Kael walked at her side now, unshaken. The last push had begun. The hum was audible before they even turned onto the final stretch like static in the air, buzzing with tension, anger, fear. And when they did make the final turn, the scene outside Ravenhurst State Penitentiary unfolded like a slow-burning riot. Floodlights swept over the parking lot. Barricades hemmed in two crowds that had spilled past designated zones. On the left, signs in red block letters screamed, "Justice for Arkell," while on the right, a wave of candles flickered behind hand-painted slogans like "Innocence Matters" and "Stop State Killings." Chants collided in the middle, voices rising above each other like dueling sermons. "He stabbed his boss. Let justice be done." "You can't kill a man based on a lie." A line of prison guards stood between them, tense and sweating under riot helmets. One protester surged forward with a megaphone, screaming into it like a man on fire. Another lobbed what looked like a water bottle. Then something glass shattered. Alina instinctively hit the brakes. "Jesus," she whispered. From the back seat, Kael stood, growling low not at the people, but the atmosphere, the chaos, the smell of it. He sensed it wasn't just noise, it was fear, and fear always preceded blood. Jack clenched his jaw. "This road won't get us to the door. It's all gridlocked from here." Alina looked at him. "So what now?" He scanned the fences, squinting as a riot shield caught the light. Then he pointed east, toward a small access path shrouded by chain link and overgrown brush. "There's an old perimeter maintenance road, loops behind the west wing. They shut it years ago after budget cuts, but it used to connect to the internal garage." Alina blinked. "You're sure?" "I helped design it." She didn't hesitate. She swung the wheel hard, tires bumping off the curb and into the rough gravel shoulder. Protesters barely noticed, too caught up in their chanting and rage to see the car slipping past like a ghost. Kael's ears stayed forward, alert, focused. His entire body language had shifted. He wasn't just riding anymore. He was on duty. The brush clawed at the car's sides as Alina navigated the tight path. Vines curled over rusted utility poles. A broken camera swung in the wind. "Looks abandoned," she muttered. "It is. But if we're lucky, the door at the end's still wired to internal comms." Jack rolled down the window slightly. The air was thick with humidity and smoke. Someone had lit a flare somewhere behind them. Sirens wailed in the distance. The countdown clock in his head ticked faster. They rounded the bend, and there it was, a squat concrete outpost half swallowed by vines, its floodlights long dead. A heavy steel door sat flush to the wall, padlocked on the outside, but a keypad blinked faintly to the left. Jack got out. Cale jumped down right behind him. "Stay close," Jack told Alina, tossing her the laptop case with the USB still inside. She clutched it like a lifeline. Jack reached into the rusted electrical box beside the keypad and yanked a loose wire. Sparks jumped, but the pad flickered awake. He typed in a 6-digit code. Beep. Pause. Then, access granted. The lock clicked open with a sound that echoed louder than it should have in that narrow corridor of silence. Jack shoved the door open. The hallway beyond was sterile, lit by pale emergency lighting. Abandoned supplies lined one-wall traffic cones, riot gear, an overturned stretcher. Cale sniffed the air and moved first, leading them inside. "Where does it come out?" Alina asked, her voice bouncing off the concrete. "Sub-level access," Jack said. "Should take us straight to the intake chamber. No protesters, no press, just guards. If we're fast, we make it before they finish final clearance." They moved quickly, the rhythm of their steps echoed by Cale's soft pause. Jack couldn't shake the feeling gnawing at him, that they were racing against more than just time, that if they were late, even by a minute, the system would claim its victory. Lucas would be just another name in a file stamped closed. They hit a final staircase. Voices above, a metal security door. Jack turned to Alina. "You're the one they'll listen to. You explain. You found Cale. You saw what was done." "What if they don't let us through?" Jack met her eyes. "Then Cale barks, and I start yelling." She nodded. Then the door opened. The guard on the other side looked about 20, pale and twitchy. "Authorized personnel only." Jack flashed his old badge. "Jack Lennox, former special investigator, emergency evidence delivery. We have video confirmation that the condemned is innocent." The guard faltered. "The warden's in protocol lockdown." "I'm not supposed to—" Cale stepped forward, not growling, not aggressive, just present, tall, proud. His eyes locked on the guards. Something passed between them in that still second. The guard swallowed hard, then keyed his radio. "Dispatch, I've got a Mr. Lennox and a woman with a registered K-9 and an evidence packet demanding immediate access." "What's protocol?" Static. Then, "Hold them. Warden Stone is on his way." Jack exhaled. It wasn't a no. They'd broken through. The fluorescent lights of the intake hallway buzzed with a sterile hum, echoing off concrete walls painted the color of dust. Jack, Alina, and Cale stepped into the inner checkpoint of Ravenhurst State Penitentiary with urgency stamped into every breath. A large red LED clock on the wall read 8:43 p.m. 17 minutes left. Behind the checkpoint window, a thick-necked officer in tan-pressed uniform raised a brow at the trio as Cale trotted in beside them, tail straight but not wagging. His gait was steady, controlled, almost military. "Uh-huh," the officer muttered. "K-9's not on the roster. No civilians pass this point without clearance." Jack stepped forward, holding up his old badge and a signed affidavit from Warden Stone's office, faxed minutes before from the substation downstairs. "I'm Lennox, former investigator on the Arkell case. This woman's KL's legal handler. We have new evidence regarding inmate Lucas Moreau. It's urgent." The officer squinted at the paperwork, but before he could wave them through, a second voice cut in. "Stop right there." A man in a gray suit stepped from the adjoining hallway, ID badge glinting under the light. Deputy Warden Charles Redmond, notorious for following procedure to the letter, notorious for hating surprises. Jack's shoulders tightened. Redmond. "Lennox," Redmond replied curtly. "What is this? A rescue dog parade? You're interfering with a state-sanctioned execution less than 20 minutes from closure." Alina stepped forward, holding up the USB in its protective case. "This was recovered less than 2 hours ago. It contains a surveillance video that may, Redmond interrupted, be inadmissible. Chain of custody, digital integrity. If it were that easy to delay an execution, we'd never have a calendar." Jack's jaw clenched. "You can't ignore this." "I'm not ignoring it," Redmond said. "But unless the warden himself greenlights your entry, I'm not going to let you wave a dog and a flash drive around and grind protocol to a halt." Kyle, standing beside Alina, let out a low huff. Not quite a growl, not a bark, just sound, like punctuation to tension. Redmond turned toward the dog, eyes narrowing. "What's this got to do with the animal?" "He was the reason we found the evidence," Alina said quietly. "He carried it, led us there." "Without KL, Lucas would have died tonight for something he didn't do." Redmond scoffed. "That's a nice story for your memoir. But dogs don't solve cases. People do." Cale stepped forward then, just 2 paces, and sat, eyes locked on Redmond's, silent, commanding. Redmond shifted uncomfortably. Jack exhaled. "He doesn't need to bark to say you're wrong." Just then, the hallway door swung open with a clang. Warden Stone entered, his face grave but composed. "Stand down, Redmond. I authorize this. Let them through." Redmond blinked. "Sir, this is a breach." "I said, let them through." Stone turned to Alina. "Do you have it?" She held up the USB. "Come with me. We'll review it now." Kyle was checked at the security station, his collar removed, paws scanned for contraband protocol, even for a K9 not in service. He stood still as a statue, gaze fixed on Alina throughout the process. When the officer tried to separate them, Kale gave one sharp bark. Alina stepped in. "He stays with me," Stone nodded. "Let them stay together." The checkpoint gate buzzed open. They stepped into the heart of the prison. Behind them the clock now read 8:52 p.m. Inside the secure media room, time felt thick. 4 people stood around a steel conference table bolted to the floor. A projector screen hummed softly at the far end. Kyle sat beside Alina, unmoving, ears tilted forward like radar. Warden Stone inserted the USB drive into the system terminal himself, fingers shaking just slightly, whether from age or the gravity of what might play next, no one could say. The screen flickered. Redmond leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, skepticism rooted in his bones. Jack Lennox, fists clenched behind him, didn't blink. And Alina. She just kept her hand on Kyle's head. The file opened. A folder, time-stamped, labeled only, Arkell Surveillance Final Stone, selected the first file. Play. The screen lit up with the familiar interior of the Arkell Systems boardroom. Cameras embedded in the ceiling caught everything from above angle, clear, steady, damning. The room was empty at first. Then the door creaked open. Warren Arkell entered, phone at his ear. From the camera's position, his expression was unreadable, but his voice came through tinny but clear. "I don't care if he's loyal. If he finds out about the transfers, we're all finished." Footsteps. A second figure stepped into frame. Trevor Arkell. No suit, no smile, just black gloves. The room watched, breathless, as the 2 men circled each other like ghosts trapped in a glass jar. "I told you to stay out of it," Warren snapped. "The board will never go for your—" Trevor moved fast. The knife flashed once, a silver arc. A gasp, a wet, horrible sound. Warren stumbled back, gripping his chest. Blood spread across his shirt like ink dropped in water. He tried to speak, to say something, maybe call for Lucas. But Trevor leaned in close, eyes dead. "You made me into this," he hissed. And then Warren dropped. The screen froze. Everyone was silent. Stone slowly sat down. Redmond's arms had fallen to his sides. Jack's knuckles had gone white against the edge of the table. Alina didn't cry. She just stared. Kyle rested his head on her leg. Quiet witness, silent anchor. Warden Stone opened the second file and audio log. Click. Another voice came through, this one distorted, masked through voice modulation software, but the meaning rang crystal clear. "He'll never be able to prove it. Lucas is clean, but we've got his prints, his IP badge, and the dummy transfer logs. Make sure the surveillance cuts out between 9:47 and 10:03. By the time anyone starts asking questions, he'll be in a box underground." The date stamp, 2 days before the murder. A third file, text transcript. It showed back-end access to Arkel system servers. Logs doctored, surveillance manually interrupted, Lucas's account used without two-factor authorization. A forgery. It had all been designed. Stone stood slowly, the weight of his office pressing on his spine. "This is real?" Jack nodded. "Verified against the original systems. Pulled with an air-gapped forensics machine. Chain of custodies intact." Alina looked up, voice cracked from the weight of all she'd been carrying. "We're not asking for justice. Not yet. We're asking for time. A stay." Redmond took a breath. For the first time, his voice had no edge. "How long until the execution?" Stone glanced at the clock. 9:58 p.m. He didn't wait. He grabbed the red emergency receiver on the wall. "Get me the chamber," he barked. "Now!" Down the hall, Lucas lay on the gurney, arms strapped tight. His heart had already begun to slow, not from the drug, but from the surrender. And then the intercom crackled. "Hold the procedure. Repeat, hold the procedure." Back in the media room, the screen went dark. No one moved. Finally, Stone turned to Alina. "That dog of yours saved a man's life tonight." She looked down at Kyle. He didn't bark. He didn't need to. The chamber smelled like antiseptic and metal. Lucas lay flat on the padded table, strapped at the wrists, the chest, the ankles. The lights overhead buzzed low, indifferent. He didn't move, hadn't for several minutes. Not out of calm, out of surrender. Behind the two-way glass, the small viewing room was nearly silent. A man from the Attorney General's office sat with a clipboard. A priest stood near the wall, his hand on a worn Bible, unopened. The air felt heavier than it had any right to be. A nurse prepared the IV. The doctor stood just to the left, rubber gloves tight at the wrists. No words were spoken between them, only nods, quiet signals, routine practice to the second. Lucas's eyes stared at the ceiling. But in his mind, he wasn't in that room. He was standing on a riverbank. Cale beside him, tail swishing softly against his jeans. The sky was amber. The air smelled of cedar and rust. He remembered that day not for anything monumental, but for the way Kyle looked at him, like he was still good. The needle hovered inches from his arm. His pulse stayed steady. And then, bzzz! The intercom snapped to life. "Stay the procedure. This is Warden Stone. I repeat, stay the procedure." Time froze. The nurse jerked back from the table. The doctor looked toward the glass. A confused murmur rose in the observation room. Lucas blinked. The metal door opened hard enough to echo. Warden Stone stormed in, sweat on his collar, a folder in one hand, a red phone in the other. "Unstrap him," he barked. The guard nearest the wall hesitated. "Now!" The straps came loose one by one. Lucas didn't speak. His body felt foreign, as if it didn't yet believe it had been released. He slowly sat up, his feet finding cold floor again for the first time in hours. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice raspy, unsure if this was another form of cruelty. Stone didn't answer right away. He placed the USB folder on the table beside him. "Someone found what we missed," he said. "Someone or something that wouldn't let go." Lucas's brow furrowed. "Kael?" he whispered. The warden just nodded once. Outside the chamber, the hallway was a blur of movement. Redmond on the phone with the governor's office. 2 officers talking in hushed tones near the security desk. Alina pacing, her hand never leaving Kael's back. And then the door opened. Lucas stepped out. His prison uniform hung loose on him now, his face pale from the IV prep, but his eyes searched the hall like a man trying to believe in miracles again. Kael saw him first. The German shepherd's ears perked, his body tensed. And then, without command, without hesitation, Kael ran, down the hall, nails clicking, straight into Lucas's chest. Lucas collapsed to his knees. The dog's weight knocked the air from his lungs, but he didn't care. He held Kael like he was holding on to the last piece of himself that hadn't been stolen. And for the first time in 5 years, Lucas wept. The echo of his footsteps down the corridor didn't sound real. Lucas walked like a man released from gravity, but still tethered by disbelief. Guards flanked him, one on each side, but neither said a word. Their hands didn't touch him. There were no cuffs, no chains, only silence. The kind of silence that comes after something impossible. He kept his eyes low, afraid that meeting another gaze would shatter the fragile thing that now clung to him. The chance barely formed, half believed, that he wasn't going to die today, that he was still here, that he mattered. The familiar metallic groan of his cell door slid open. For 5 years, it had sounded like a sentence. But now, it sounded like a breath. He stepped in. Same concrete slab of a bed, same cinder block walls, same slit of a window high up near the ceiling, just enough to see the sky, never enough to feel it. The door closed behind him with a final click. Lucas sat on the bed slowly, his hands shaking now that adrenaline had faded. The tremor moved up his arms like a chill through the bones. He didn't know what time it was, didn't know how much had changed, didn't dare ask, because if he opened his mouth, the dream might break. He stared at the floor. 20 tiles across, 11 deep. He'd counted them every morning for years. Now he couldn't count anything, except the beats of his own heart. They felt unearned. His fingers curled into fists on his knees. He leaned forward, elbows on thighs, chin down. Then a bark, short, sharp. His head snapped up. For a moment he didn't move. Was it his mind playing tricks again? Another cruel loop of memory? He stood, slowly, walked to the far wall, the window slit. He rose onto the balls of his feet, gripped the edge with trembling hands, and peered through the glass. Kael. Kael was in the yard, The dog moved with purpose, tail swaying in a half-wag, half-sentry rhythm. His fur was sunlit, his posture alert. And then he stopped, looked up, right at Lucas, and wagged his tail. Lucas dropped back down to the floor, his back against the wall, and let out a sound half-laugh, half-sob. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't mercy or illusion or delirium. It was real. Cale was alive. And so was he. District Attorney Helena Price didn't speak as she walked into the evidence room. She didn't have to. The room was thick with the kind of silence that only falls when power enters the space with blood on its hands and knows it. Her heels tapped sharply against the linoleum, each step cutting the tension like a scalpel. In her gloved hand, she carried a chain of custody form freshly printed. In the other, a manila envelope marked Urgent, Verified Content, Arkell Systems. Behind her, 2 forensic techs followed with a laptop, an external hard drive, and the collar. Cale's collar. Still slightly frayed, still stained at the edges, still holding the weight of something far heavier than leather and brass. They set up quickly. Helena said nothing. She just stood in front of the monitor, arms crossed tightly across her chest, as the tech pulled up the video file recovered from the USB. The screen flickered to life. And there it was. Timestamp. 01/12:43 a.m. Location, Arkell Penthouse. Private study. Subject, Trevor Arkell. No music, no preamble, just Trevor's voice, cruel and breathless. You always thought you were untouchable, old man. You thought you could name me your heir and still pull the strings. You were wrong. Then the blade. The sickening sound, a cry, a collapse. And the camera strategically hidden inside a high-end sound system caught every second. In high definition. No glitches, no grain, no possibility of error. Helena's jaw locked. Her knuckles whitened against her arms. She turned. Time of death? She asked the forensic analyst. Approximately 1:14 a.m., he confirmed, consistent with the original autopsy report. And the voice match? Confirmed. The vocal sample is 98.7% matched with Trevor Arkell. We've run it twice. Helena Price exhaled through her nose. It wasn't relief, it was fury in slow release. Behind her, her chief investigator added, We cross-referenced the metadata. The file was time-stamped 3 hours before the surveillance system went down for maintenance. Which means someone scrubbed the primary feed to hide this, Helena finished, and replaced it with footage that framed Lucas. The room went silent. She looked at the collar, held it like a relic. The USB had been tucked inside a hidden lining beneath the brass nameplate, stitched in with surgical precision. Whoever did this, she said slowly, knew the system was broken. But they also knew the one thing we wouldn't doubt. The dog, the tech whispered. Helena nodded. Dogs don't lie, she said. Hours later, her press conference would make headlines across every major network in the country. Breaking. New evidence clears death row. Inmate Lucas Reeve in Arkell murder. Her voice, firm and deliberate, rang out from behind the podium. This office has officially launched a full-scale investigation into prosecutorial misconduct, falsification of surveillance evidence, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Our preliminary findings confirm that the video found on Mr. Reeves' service dog was genuine and unaltered. We owe it to this man and to the public to uncover how this failure of justice was allowed to happen. And we will. In his cell, Lucas sat cross-legged on the floor, Cale's bark from earlier still echoing in his memory like a hymn. He didn't know yet what the world outside was seeing, Didn't know that his name was now trending nationwide. Didn't know that even now forensic techs were combing through old evidence boxes, comparing fingerprints, re-examining files with fresh eyes and the weight of shame behind every motion. But what he did know, what he felt, was that something had shifted. The machine had started to turn. It was slow, it was brutal, it had teeth, but it was moving, and this time it was heading toward truth. Jack Lennox hadn't stepped into the city archives in over a decade. The smell hit him, first old paper, mildew, ink like ghosts of truth and lies packed tight in forgotten drawers. He used to believe this place held history. Now he knew better. It held silence. Alina followed him closely, her breath shallow. She carried Cale's leash loosely in one hand, though the dog didn't need guiding. Cale walked with quiet purpose, almost like he knew this wasn't over. Because it wasn't. The USB had cleared Lucas of the murder. But it didn't explain everything. It didn't explain the bank transfers, the erased surveillance logs, the forged reports from Jack's own unit, and most of all, it didn't explain why. 3 days ago, they'd found a second data cache hidden in the collar lining, a micro SD card embedded in the same thread used to conceal the USB. This time, it wasn't video. It was spreadsheets, encrypted financial documents, offshore transfers. Shell companies registered in Belarus, Panama, and the Cayman Islands, all traced to holding companies connected to Arkel systems. Jack had taken one look and said just 2 words, "This is bigger." Now, in a back room filled with dusty files and a single humming desktop, Jack stared at the screen, lines of code and bank data scrolling by like confessions. Alina stood behind him, reading each line aloud. Crown Ridge Holdings, registered in the same building as Arkel's old R&D wing. Transferred $12 million over 4 years to a trust labeled Judicial Allocations Tier A. What the hell is Tier A? Jack didn't answer. His fingers flew across the keyboard. Kyle shifted on the floor. Then ping? The screen stopped. Tier A, allocated beneficiaries. Office of D.A. Helena Price. Chief Judge Malcolm Dean. Prosecutor Alan Farrell. Alina stepped back like she'd been struck. You're telling me they weren't just wrong, they were bought? Jack leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, jaw clenched. Lucas wasn't framed just to protect Trevor. He was framed to protect the pipeline. Alina's voice cracked. What pipeline? He opened his eyes. The fraud pipeline, he said. Warren Arkel found a way to bypass internal audits using real estate development grants. He funneled state contracts to ghost companies. Billions in play. Anyone who got in the way, gone. She nodded slowly, heart pounding. And Lucas? Jack's voice was low. He found out. That's what Warren meant when he said he'd made a mistake trusting him. Lucas stumbled on the shell networks and the quarterly compliance reports, probably confronted Warren, which got him killed, which made Lucas the perfect fall guy. They printed everything, every transfer, every signature, every routing number. They stacked documents into files, bound them tight, and locked them in Jack's trunk. Alina didn't speak much during the drive. Kyle sat upright between them, alert. When they stopped at a red light, she finally whispered, "We gave the system proof of Lucas's innocence. Now we're about to show them why it was so desperate to bury him." Jack didn't look at her. He was staring out the window, but his voice was sure. Not just bury him. Bury the only witness they couldn't buy. Back in her apartment that night, Alina stood barefoot by the window, watching the wind move through the trees. Caleb sat beside her, his ears perked, eyes never leaving her face. She rested a hand on his head. "You remembered," she whispered. "All this time, all those nights." Caleb had carried not just memory, but evidence, more loyal than any system, more faithful than any oath. The next morning, Jack submitted the evidence packet to a federal oversight office. Not local, not state, federal. There was no more room for compromise, no one left to trust. A storm was coming, and this time it had names. The luxury penthouse of the Arkell Grand Tower didn't know silence. It usually thrummed with soft jazz, the buzz of phones, the low murmur of assistants outside glass walls. But this morning, the world fell mute at exactly 7:42 a.m., when the elevator doors slid open and 8 federal agents stepped out in a line. No sirens, no shouting, just the sound of purpose. Trevor Arkell sat in his Italian leather chair, sipping an espresso, eyes fixed on a stock ticker flowing across a 12K curved monitor. Barefoot, robe half-tied. A morning ritual drenched in confidence. He didn't turn around when the door opened. Didn't flinch when the first badge was shown. Didn't blink when the lead agent said, "Trevor Arkell, you're under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and the first-degree murder of Warren Arkell." He simply sighed, set the espresso down with surgical grace, and turned, finally, with a faint smirk. "Tell my father," he said, eyes dead as winter. He deserved it. The flashbulbs ignited like gunfire. Outside the tower, the street had become a jungle press. Protesters, podcasters, and former Arkell employees alike crowded behind metal barricades. Reporters screamed questions no one expected answered. Is it true his dog carried the evidence? Was the murder part of a corporate cover-up? Is Lucas Hale being released? Does Caleb deserve a medal? Trevor emerged, cuffed, flanked by agents. The crowd surged, voices rising into chaos. But Trevor? He looked bored, like it was all too late to matter, like none of this touched him, like monsters only wear masks when it suits the season. Back at the precinct, Jack Lennox sat in the observation room. His fists were clenched tight on the table, knuckles pale. Through the one-way glass, he watched Trevor lean back in the interrogation chair like he'd just finished brunch. The lead investigator, Agent Park, paced slowly in front of him. "You're quiet, Mr. Arkell," Trevor smiled. "You're slow. Want to tell us why you killed your father?" "No," Trevor said. "But I'm sure you'll find a reason that makes sense to you." "You stabbed him 18 times. "That's a lot of emphasis," he said dryly. "He must have made me feel strongly about something." Agent Park leaned in, voice low. "You framed an innocent man. You orchestrated a cover-up. You bought prosecutors, threatened witnesses, forged security footage." Trevor cut in, still calm. "And the only thing that unraveled my masterpiece was a dog." For a moment, his face cracked. Not in guilt, not in fear, in disgust. Jack turned away from the glass. Alina was waiting in the hallway, Caleb sitting by her feet. She looked up when she saw Jack's expression. "He confessed?" "Not directly," Jack muttered. "But he's proud of it. He wanted this." She frowned. "Wanted what?" Jack looked down at Caleb, then back at her. "To win, even if he lost." Outside the station, the press conference began. DA Helena Price stood behind the podium, her hands visibly shaking. Her voice, though practiced, held a tremor she couldn't fully mask. "Today, Federal agents executed a warrant for the arrest of Trevor Arkell in connection with the murder of Warren Arkell and the wrongful conviction of Lucas Hale. Flash. Flash. Microphones buzzed. I want to be clear, this office failed Mr. Hale, but it is because of new evidence and the courage of individuals outside this system, including a retired investigator, a civilian advocate, and a service animal named Cale, that we are now able to pursue justice. Cale's name drew a murmur from the crowd. A woman clapped, then another. By the time Alina and Cale stepped onto the sidewalk, the applause had become a wave. Cale didn't react like a celebrity. He stood still, alert, proud, as if he understood what had been taken and what had just begun to be returned. It began with a headline that barely fit the screen. "Innocent on death row, the dog who saved his master." New York Times, front page. Then came the flood. Morning anchors repeated his name like a prayer. Viral tweets called for national reform. Hashtags bloomed across platforms. #Free Lucas, #Cale the Savior, #Justice Unleashed. Talk show hosts cried on air. College kids printed his photo on hoodies. Protesters, once divided outside the prison, now marched side by side, holding candles, portraits of Kyle, and banners demanding accountability. Lucas Hale had become what the world craved, a symbol. But symbols aren't people. In the infirmary wing of Black Ridge Penitentiary, Lucas sat on the edge of a cot, legs motionless, hands folded tightly between his knees. His jumpsuit was wrinkled, stained with dried sweat. The cot groaned beneath his weight when he shifted, eyes trained on the flickering wall-mounted TV in the corner. He watched himself. Watched footage of his face pale, stunned, seconds after the execution was halted. Watched Cale barking through the prison gates. Watched strangers chant his name. And he didn't smile. He whispered, "Where were they 5 years ago?" The nurse didn't answer. Neither did the silence. That night, Jack Lennox sat in his truck across from the courthouse, fingers curled around a styrofoam coffee cup, watching as news crews tore down their makeshift tents. He could still hear Trevor's voice echoing from the interrogation room, smug, venomous. "I gave him a legacy. Martyrs last longer than assistants." Jack exhaled. This wasn't over. Meanwhile, Cale rested on the living room floor of Alina's apartment, his ribs rising and falling with steady breath. The news played in the background, but he didn't look. He just blinked, slow, watchful. Alina reached down and stroked the fur between his ears. "Do you think he knows?" she asked. Cale thumped his tail once, not eager, not playful, just present, just yes. Outside the apartment, reporters camped under the oak trees, their vans humming through the night. One tried the buzzer 3 times before giving up. Another left a bouquet of blue flowers with a card that read, "To the bravest dog in America." Cale didn't bark. He didn't need to. Back in the infirmary, Lucas was handed a letter. No envelope. Just 2 creases and a faint scent lavender and rain. Alina's handwriting. "The world is loud right now. You don't have to answer anything. Kyle is safe. So are you. Rest." He read it twice. And then once more. Not because he didn't understand it, but because it was the first time in 5 years anyone had spoken to him without asking him to prove he mattered. The next morning, headlines turned sharp. How did the system fail so badly? Investigation into death row case ignites legal firestorm. Who else is innocent? An emergency hearing was scheduled. the governor issued a statement. "We owe Mr. Hale a full pardon, a public apology, and systemic change." But Lucas? He still hadn't left the cell. Even as the walls opened, even as the locks clicked free, even as freedom was declared by strangers in microphones. Because freedom isn't a door. It's what happens when you believe you're allowed to walk through it. The door buzzed open with a sound that had haunted Lucas for years, sharp, mechanical, final. He didn't flinch, but his breath caught in his throat as he turned toward the visitation room. It had been emptied for this moment. No guards pacing, no glass divider, no ticking clock on the wall. Just quiet, and a leash held loosely in the hand of the only woman who'd never stopped believing. Alina gave one nod to the handler. Then she let go. Cale didn't hesitate. He crossed the room not with a bark, but with a sound deeper raw, mournful, bone-shaking. A howl that cracked through sterile concrete and stitched years of silence in a single breath. Lucas dropped to his knees. His voice was already breaking before the words even formed. "You saved me." Cale collided with him, chest to chest, muzzle to shoulder, burying his face into the man's neck like no time had passed at all. His paws scrambled against the floor, trying to get closer, as if trying to push into Lucas's ribs and live there. "I knew you'd come," Lucas whispered. He didn't cry the way people on television did. No loud sobs. No cinematic collapse. Just a shudder. A shiver through shoulders that had carried too much. A man broken open by nothing more than a dog's heartbeat against his own. Alina stood by the doorway, hands trembling, watching the only two beings she had loved without condition finally find their way back to each other. She didn't interrupt, didn't wipe the tear that rolled down her cheek. Some things didn't need commentary. Cale licked Lucas's chin once, then again, then rested his head on Lucas's chest the way he had on that very first night years ago in a too-small apartment when the world was crueler and yet somehow simpler. Lucas tilted his head up to the fluorescent ceiling and closed his eyes. The lights didn't feel like prison anymore. They just felt like light. A guard stood just outside the room, hand on his radio, watching the reunion through the window. He whispered into the mic, "It's happening." A crackle came in reply. "Let them have time." For minutes, maybe hours, Lucas didn't move. His jumpsuit still smelled of bleach. His wrists still bore the marks of the cuffs. But none of it mattered now. Cale had found him, had walked through fire, through lies, through cages, through silence. And Lucas? He finally believed he might be worth the rescue. Outside, press vans rolled down the street. Protest signs were lowered, and somewhere a law clerk hit "send" on the first of many subpoenas tied to the case. But in that room, none of that existed. Just breath and fur. And a man once sentenced to die, wrapped in the quiet forgiveness of the only soul who never doubted his worth. It happened just minutes after the reunion. One moment Alina was smiling, soft, distant, proud, watching Lucas and Cale huddled together in the stillness of the visitation room. The next, her knees gave out beneath her like a string had been pulled, a whisper of motion, a gasp, then silence, as her body crumpled gently to the floor. "Alina!" Lucas was already on his feet, Cale barking sharp and panicked beside him. Guards rushed in, a medic was summoned. The scene unraveled into orders and echoing footfalls, and through it all, Alina lay there, pale, breathing shallowly, her eyes fluttering against the harsh white light overhead. In the hospital room, hours later, the world felt impossibly small. The machines beeped rhythmically. The air smelled of antiseptic and something heavier like endings. Lucas sat beside her bed, his hand wrapped around hers, thin now, almost translucent beneath the skin. He hadn't said much since they brought her in. There weren't words big enough for this, not after everything. Kael lay curled at her feet, head resting near the corner of the bed. He didn't make a sound, but he hadn't moved since they arrived. Alina stirred. Her eyes blinked open, and her lips twitched into a smile that looked like it hurt. "I guess I waited just long enough," she whispered, her voice a rasp, broken at the edges. Lucas tried to reply, but she cut him off with a shallow breath and a flicker of her fingers. "No tears. We did it, remember? You're here. He's here." She glanced down at Kael, who looked up as if understanding the weight in her gaze. "Lucas," her voice cracked again. "Promise me something. Anything." She didn't hesitate. "Promise me you'll keep him safe." Lucas nodded, eyes burning. "With my life." Alina's lips twitched again. "Good. Because that's what he gave. For yours." The monitor beeped. A nurse stepped quietly in, adjusted something, stepped out. The hush of the hospital swallowed everything except the sound of Kael's breathing and the soft rustle of cotton sheets. Lucas leaned in closer. "I never got to say it right," he whispered. "But you saved us. Me. Him. All of it." Alina blinked slowly, tears welling but never falling. "I know," she breathed. "I never needed the words." That night, as the hallway lights dimmed and the hospital drifted into its strange hush of machines and whispered grief, Kael stood at the end of her bed, still, silent, a sentinel, as if he knew this was the last time he'd guard her in this world. Lucas sat on the edge of his cot, hands clenched, nails biting into calloused palms. The small, gray-walled cell around him pulsed with the ache of waiting. No sirens, no voices, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the weight of a silence too vast to hold. Alina was dying, and he couldn't be there. Somewhere beyond these walls, outside the barbed fences and bureaucratic cages, she lay on a narrow hospital bed, her breaths counted by machines, her time unraveling like thread pulled loose. Jack had called an hour ago, voice low, measured, steady in that way only guilt-worn men could be. "She's holding on, Lucas. But it won't be long." He didn't ask to speak to her. What could he say that wouldn't break her more? Kael lay near the bars of the cell now, his body curled tight, ears twitching with every footstep down the corridor. He hadn't eaten since they returned, hadn't barked, hadn't slept, just waited watchful, as if some part of him still believed in the impossible. Lucas looked down at him, then to the wall, and something shifted in his chest. He pressed his palm flat against the concrete, closed his eyes, let the weight of every memory, every shared glance, every river walk, every wordless night flood through him. In his mind, he pictured her, fragile, pale, but still fierce behind the pain. And then, like a whisper between heartbeat and breath, the vow came. "I'll take care of him, Alina. I swear it. He'll never be alone. Not again." The air didn't move, but Kael lifted his head. His eyes met Lucas's. No sound passed between them. No command, no cry. Just a quiet understanding that something had been exchanged and sealed. Outside the cell block, the sun dipped below the western wall, bleeding orange and gold through the narrow window. The light didn't reach Lucas, but he saw it on Kyle's fur. A faint shimmer, like someone was brushing goodbye across the dog's back. He exhaled slowly, and for the first time in years, the breath didn't carry regret. It carried resolve. That night, when the guards passed by, they found the inmate wide awake, not restless, not bitter, but waiting, and beside him, the dog watching the wall, as if somewhere beyond that cement and steel, the woman who once saved them both was listening and smiling. The courtroom was silent, so silent you could hear the creak of old wood beneath shifting feet, the distant hum of the ceiling fans, the subtle stutter of breath being held by an entire room. Lucas stood at the defense table, shoulders square but hands trembling, the orange of his jumpsuit long replaced with a simple gray suit. It didn't fit quite right. Too loose in the shoulders, too long in the sleeves. He hadn't worn real clothes in 5 years. But it was real. All of it. The gavel struck once firm, final. Judge Marianne Elridge, a woman known for her spine of iron and eyes that had seen the worst of humanity, looked down at him. Her voice didn't waver, but something cracked beneath the surface. "This court," she said, pausing for a breath, "finds that Lucas Grant was wrongfully convicted of the murder of Warren Arkell. With new evidence deemed conclusive and irrefutable, this court vacates his sentence, annuls his conviction, and issues a full exoneration." A beat. Then another. She leaned forward, voice low now, intimate. "This was one of the most grievous failures of the justice system I've presided over in my career. And for that, this court owes you more than freedom. It owes you an apology no words can repay." Lucas didn't move. Not at first. It was the sound that came next that undid him. A stifled sob, then another. From the gallery, where strangers clutched tissues, where Alina's empty seat bore a single yellow rose. Jack Lennox stood in the back, hat in hand, his eyes glassy, jaw tight. To his right, Cale sat at attention, leash loose but still golden badge pinned to his harness. Then someone whispered, "Thank God," and the room broke. Tears, applause, relief and rage tangled into one. Lucas turned slowly, as if unsure if this, too, was part of the dream he had replayed so often inside his cell. But it wasn't. He walked toward Cale slow, measured. The dog met him halfway, bounding the last few feet. The bark was sharp, joyful, reclaiming. Lucas dropped to his knees, arms wrapping around the German shepherd's thick neck. The courtroom blurred as Cale licked at his face, and Lucas, silent so long, laughed. It wasn't loud, but it was free. Later, as cameras flashed outside the courthouse and reporters shouted questions he couldn't yet answer, Lucas looked skyward. The clouds were thinning, the kind of sky Alina used to say meant change was coming. He whispered a name into the air, not for attention, but for thanks. Then he looked down at Kyle, who stood alert beside him, tail thumping against the marble steps. And together they stepped into the light. 3 months had passed since the courtroom erupted in tears, since Lucas Grant walked free beneath a sky no longer filtered through barbed wire and reinforced glass. But freedom wasn't enough. Not for Lucas. He hadn't survived to simply disappear. Instead, he built something. It began as a single idea scribbled on the back of a paper napkin while sitting across from Jack Lennox at a diner just outside city limits. The ink bled from the sweat of the coffee mug, but the words were clear. Cale's Path. A foundation born not from vengeance, but from gratitude. Lucas explained it between sips. A place for the exonerated, those lost in the cracks of the justice system, to rebuild with dignity. But more than that, he wanted to pair each man or woman with a trained service dog, not just for companionship, but for grounding, trust, and hope. "I had Kyle," Lucas said softly, fingers grazing the dog's thick fur beneath the table. "Most of them don't have anyone." Jack didn't speak for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out his old badge, and laid it on the table. "You'll need someone who remembers what went wrong," he said. "Count me in." By fall, the first group of 5 clients had arrived, each one recently cleared after years of wrongful imprisonment. None spoke much at first. They didn't have to. Lucas recognized the look in their eyes, the twitch at sudden sounds, the stillness when praised, the doubt that came with waking up free. But the dogs understood them in ways people never could. Kyle, now retired, helped train the newcomers. He moved among them like a quiet sentinel, nudging hands, curling beside cots, barking gently when panic threatened to take hold. The other dogs followed his lead, rescues turned into lifelines. They didn't ask what the men had done. They just stayed. Alina returned slowly, her body still fragile from chemotherapy, but her will was sharper than ever. The first time she stepped into the newly built therapy barn, she brought a crate of toys and blankets and told Lucas, "You're not the only one Cale saved." She became the soul of the place organizing, tending to the garden, reading to the men while they worked leather collars by hand. Some days she moved slower. Other days her laugh carried across the field like music. Lucas never asked her to rest. She never asked him to stop looking out the window whenever Kyle wasn't by his side. They hosted their first public event 6 weeks later. A ribbon cutting at the new lodge, now bearing a plaque etched with Kyle's silhouette. The mayor showed up. So did 3 reporters, a senator's aide, and more neighbors than Lucas could count. But the speech wasn't his. Jack stepped up to the microphone, cleared his throat, and gestured toward Lucas, Alina, and Kyle beside him. "You're looking at a man who had every reason to give up," Jack said. "But instead, he built a bridge." He looked at the crowd, then at Kyle. "And that bridge has 4 legs." That night, under a sky brimming with stars, Lucas sat on the porch of the main building. Kyle rested beside him, chin on his boot. Alina was asleep inside, and the wind smelled like pine and fresh paint. Lucas watched a pair of men, both once broken by injustice, walk their new dogs past the gate. One of them laughed. Lucas leaned forward, scratched behind Cale's ear, and whispered, "We made it." Cale didn't move, just a slow, soft wag of the tail, as if to say, "We're just getting started." The sun was just beginning to dip below the tree line when Lucas found himself back on that familiar path, the riverbank where the trees leaned in as if listening, where the air always smelled of damp earth and pine needles. Kyle padded ahead, slower now, but with the same unwavering gait. His coat had thinned in places. The black saddle across his back had faded to silver. But he still walked a half-step ahead, always watching, always leading. Lucas didn't rush. He let his boots sink into the same muddy trail they once walked every evening after work, before the sirens, before the cell, before the darkness. It felt like another life. No, It was another life. And yet Kael had never really left it. A breeze whispered through the branches. Lucas glanced up. Sunlight broke through the canopy in fractured beams, the kind of light that made you stop and breathe a little deeper. Kael stopped too. He turned, eyes meeting Lucas's. That look knowing, soft, unshakable. Lucas reached out, letting his fingers drift across the fur just behind Kael's ear. The dog leaned into the touch the way he always had. No words, no tricks. Just gravity between two souls who had survived everything that tried to erase them. Lucas exhaled. "We're finally home," he said. Kael didn't bark. He didn't need to. The slow wag of his tail, the quiet sigh that left his chest, it was enough. They sat together on the riverbank. Lucas lowered himself to the ground, back against a mossy stone, the rhythm of the water flowing beside them like time made liquid. Kael curled close, resting his head against Lucas's knee. The river shimmered in the golden light, and somewhere in the trees a bird called once, then went silent. Lucas closed his eyes, not to escape, but to remember. The cold meals, the needle inches from his skin. The way Kael had once laid his head on his chest that very first night, years ago, trembling but trusting. They had come full circle. And yet something new had begun. Down the path, laughter drifted from the nearby center. Former inmates, new lives, service dogs learning commands. Alina's voice rose faintly above it all, stronger now, still healing, but alive. Lucas opened his eyes, watching the ripples in the water. "Thank you," he whispered, not to the sky, not to the world, but to the dog who had never stopped walking toward him. Kael stirred, nose twitching, then settled again, content in the quiet. The last light slipped below the trees. They didn't need more words. They had this: a walk, a river, a forever that never asked to be understood, only shared. In a world where trust is fragile and justice can falter, one dog's quiet loyalty became the lifeline that pulled a man back from the edge. Kael's story is more than a tale of survival. It's a reminder of the silent strength animals carry, and how they often see truth long before we do. German shepherds like Kael are not just working dogs. They are protectors, healers, companions who carry our burdens without asking for anything in return. This story, though fictional, speaks to a deeper truth. Love, especially the kind shared between a human and their dog, can endure against impossible odds. Let it be a call to honor the voiceless, to stand up for those who can't defend themselves, and to believe, even in the darkest moments, that redemption is possible, not just through systems, but through connection. If this story moved you, remember, thousands of loyal dogs are waiting in shelters right now, ready to offer the same devotion Kael gave. Maybe your next best friend is one of them. Let's build a world where no loyalty goes unseen, and where every Kael finds his way home. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us what truly matters.